Sustainability Summit. We will now begin the session on financing for transition. To achieve a sustainable future, we must balance rapid economic growth with climate goals, requiring a comprehensive strategy and integrated policy framework in India. Robust financing mechanisms are crucial for climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Today's session will explore challenges and opportunities in sustainable finance, emphasizing a just transition. Collaboration and innovation will help India meet its climate commitments and advance towards sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to warmly welcome the moderator and all panel members to the dais for this session. I request the moderator, Mr. Manish Chaurasia, CEO, Tata Capital, to take the lead and commence the discussion. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's my absolute privilege to be here today to chair this very important session on financing the transition. I would say that it is as we gather at this critical moment, it is clear than ever before the need for sustainable development and need to mitigate the climate risk. When we talk about climate risk, it is not just about the low carbon projects or the climate action mitigation. I think it is equally about how we are going to adapt to the changes which will surely happen. The fact that, warming has been happening for a long time. I think it is equally about how do we attain a just transition in which no segment of the society suffers, and we are able to balance economic development with the need for environmental stewardship. Naturally, we require action on number of dimensions, starting from the policy, then going to the technology, then individual actions, and finally financing. Financing is a very important pillar for our fight against global warming. And in this session, as you are aware, our focus is on the financing. Now, talking about financing, there are various numbers floating around about the financing required to fight climate change. Figures vary from about $4 trillion to about $6 trillion. Big numbers. But then, if you talk about numbers in isolation, then they give you only a very vague picture about the reality. I think it is always very important to compare numbers with something. So when we talk about requirement of $4 to $6 trillion requirement per annum to fight climate change, I think it is important to compare it with the global savings. And global savings in 2022 was about $27 trillion. So clearly a requirement of 5 trillion against a saving of 27 trillion is maybe about 20% or so. It does not look very high compared to the fact that we are fighting for our survival as a species. So clearly this funding is not a macroeconomic challenge. Then what do we really discuss? What are we really talking about? I think what we are really talking about is the fact that when we talk about global savings, all these savings are in the developed world, who have in fact, in a way created the problem by emitting too much of carbon. But when we talk about need for climate action, most of these actions are required in the developing countries. So on one hand, you have savings, but they are savings in one part of the world and requirement is in some other part of the world. So I think when we have this kind of a session, what we are really talking about is the problem of capital flows. So I guess, one of the key things we will discuss today is how do we ensure that capital flows happen to really fight this global warming. Now talking about India. India is in a very unique spot because today India is the third largest emitter in the world after China and US. But ironically, I would say that if you talk about per capita emissions, then India is 1/3 of the per capita for the world. For the world, it is about 4.5 tons of CO2 equivalent per annum. India is only at 1.5 per capita CO2 per annum. So on per capita, we are very low, but overall we are very high. At the same time, we are very proud of the fact that we are likely to grow at the rate of 6 to 7% per annum for a number of years. But clearly, if we are such a high emitter, then we can't really follow the model of the Western countries. We have to change the model, and we have to ensure that our carbon intensity of development is not very high. And the fact is that any action of India will be very closely watched, because even a small increase in per capita emission will lead to large emission for the entire world. And not only this, India is also highly vulnerable because there are a number of studies which show that India is among the top 10 most vulnerable countries in the world, given our huge coastline. So we have a problem which needs to be addressed. And on that, we have to work on a number of dimensions. We have to see that we are able to do our climate mitigation and climate adaptation in such a way that all segments of the society prosper in the process. For this, it is very important that our financial systems are aligned. And this is what will be our topic of discussion today. I'm very happy to say that we have got a very strong panel today, which can give us very diverse views on this topic. And now I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, and I look forward to diverse perspectives from them. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Dibrat Sen. Dibrat is Managing Director and Head of Global Banking, North India. And he's also lead for sustainable finance for entire HSBC India. Welcome, Dibrat. Then Mr. Rajesh Miglani. Rajesh is Senior Business Climate Specialist and Climate Anchor for entire South Asia for International Finance Corporation. Welcome, Rajesh. Then Mr. Hafiz Hussain. Hafiz is Vice President of Sustainable Finance with a global role for the DBS Group. So very warm welcome to all the panelists. And now without much ado, we'll start the question answer session. My first question is to Dibirat. So Dibirat, when we talk about financing, in India, the financing has been taking place for the last 10 years or so. And plus minus a few $1 billion, I think probably India would have spent about $100 billion in the last 8 years or so on climate action, maybe about 75% in debt and 25% in equity. But then if we take next 8 years, we are talking about something like 750 to 800 billion. And that is not a small number, because today if you take the entire credit market in India by the banks, it is about 1.5 trillion. So this amount is 50% of the entire credit market in India. So for this kind of money to come in, what do you think are the key challenges? And what should we do about it, for India in general and for maybe HSBC in particular?
Manish, you are very right. For a net zero transition till 2070 as a country, the financing needs are huge. There are several estimates, and you touched upon some of those estimates. It's a very uphill task. Now, based on our own experience, working in the market for the last few years, there are 4 broad categories of challenges that I would like to bucket these issues. And I'll touch upon each of them very briefly. So these 4 are in no particular order of preference. One is project bankability. The second is data quality. The third is minimal to absent credit traps or long-term takeouts. And the fourth is lack of sustainable finance taxonomy. So let me take each of these in a bit more detail. So when you talk about bankability of the projects, while people understand what typically the bankability criteria are, and mostly sustainable financing broadly is project financing with certain bells and whistles that one needs to look at. The core issues continue to remain. So, as a result of which, what we are seeing is that we are seeing a lot of capital chase very minimal number of borrowers. So, some of these borrowers have understood what a right project complexion should be, and therefore the projects are baked in and brought to the financial institutions in a form and manner that is digestible. But by and large, and especially with new emergent technologies and new areas that need financing in this overall wider pool, there are some severe issues. So, land being one of them, as we see this play out in the renewables. The second is the sanctity of contracts, which is something that has plagued India for a very long time. Also, how you sculpt the project in terms of the debt serviceability, those kind of issues remain very important, and also the equity contribution. So, in the traditional sense, whatever are important from the bankability of a project continues to be the case for sustainability of these projects. And as we look at more and more new areas which are evolving, this will be a very important criteria for all the financing institutions to look at. The second, what I mentioned, was data quality. I think this is very important from an outsider's point of view, because if you still see that the large pools of capital are going to come from more developed markets, and there is always a sense of skepticism when they look at emerging markets in terms of the data quality. And definitely there is an issue in terms of the overall quality of data that we produce. And this becomes increasingly important, keeping in mind the very big risk of greenwashing. Because when you are financing a project which is labeled as green, not only are you assessing the project based on scientific principles, therefore data is important, but in terms of monitoring and reporting accurately, those data quality will also be taken into account by the lenders. So therefore, it is important to have a very robust way of collecting and reporting this data, and there are several initiatives underway, but it's still not fully developed. The third is what I mentioned, that almost absent credit trap or long-term takeout financing, because the large players in the market are mostly commercial banks, as is the case in most of the corporate financing domain. And commercial banks will always have the asset liability mismatch. So typically they would be looking at funding maybe 5-6 years of financing, whereas most of these projects will have a very long gestation period, which need one very concessional capital and also very long-term financing. So from that aspect, added with the technology risk that some of these projects entail, there is a need for better quality of credit traps, and we have some development of financial institutions and international financial institutions which can talk a bit more about this. But good quality credit traps and long-term takeout financing are the key to enable more capital flow into this project. And fourth, we have harped upon this for a long time, the need for a sustainable finance taxonomy. That will remove, firstly, a lot of greenwashing risk, and then for financial institutions to really have a taxonomy is very important. We have seen markets like Singapore, etc., already develop that taxonomy. There is already some work underway in India, but we haven't seen that come to light, and that, I think, will put a very level playing field for everybody to look at any proposal and decide whether it's sustainable finance and channelize capital accordingly. So these four broadly are the challenges that need to be overcome.
Very important point, Dibrat. Enforceability of contracts, taxonomy, credit traps. And I do believe that if we have to improve our enforceability of contracts, then we have to improve the health of our public institutions, who are invariably the off-takers, like state electricity boards, state transport undertakings. So now coming to Rajesh. Rajesh, these are all very important points. Need for a taxonomy, need to strengthen the public institutions. And IFC has been playing a very important role in India for the last so many years. So what are some of the specific initiatives which IFC has taken in this regards? And what are some more things which are required to be done? We would like to know your views on that.
Thank you, Manish. Look, India is quite a happening place as far as climate finance is concerned, and we are seeing now investments beyond renewables, right? Across different themes. And in fact, Government of India is also quite supportive and coming up with favorable policies, which is leading to investment. I can tell you about IFC. We had a record year this time in FY24. we surpassed $1 billion in climate-related investment for the first time, which is like 1/3 of our total business, what we do in IFC. And if I try to tell you the kind of investments which we made, the industrial decarb, clean energy, and green building, that accounted for almost 85% of our total climate business program. And Manish, to give you some specific examples of what we have done, I would say I'd give three themes essentially. One is sustainability linked loan. So this is where we did exceptionally well last year. SLL accounted for almost 37% of our total climate business. It's applicable not only in hard to abate sector, but even in other sectors as well. So for example, we did one Grasim sustainability linked loan, which is hard to abate, and couple of SLLs in the commercial business park, REIT, Mindspace and Capital Land. And here what we are trying to do, for those of you who are not familiar with SLL, we actually nudge the companies to take some strenuous targets, and the KPIs, the key performance indicators, are actually tied up to the corporate decarbonization goals. So I think the very interesting thing which we are seeing is our clients are equally reciprocating, right? And they really want to take up some targets, and need of an R is essentially, the license to operate for this industry now is to decarbonize, and this is what our clients clearly understand. So SLL is one example. Then the second example on green housing, IFC, we are the leaders in creating this green housing market in India. And I think since 2013, we have done more than $2 billion of financing. But of late, what we are trying to do, Manish, is the greening of the self-built construction homes. So the self-built construction home, which is like a kind of affordable housing, 60% of the construction is happening in this particular space where there are no green interventions. So our team, what they have done is they have improvised our existing green certification, so which is called EDGE, Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency. So they have tweaked this certification for the self-built construction homes, right? Very pragmatic suggestions to the homeowners. And we are partnering with the few housing finance companies like Aadhar, we have Vastu, Home First, and IFL, and using a catalytic capital, or you can call it as a blended finance, using some UK money in the form of performance-based guarantee. So we did $200 million of financing. So just using $5 million of catalytic capital and leading to, so $200 million financing. So every dollar of the UK donor money which we used in the form of performance-based incentive, that led to 30 to 40, $30 to $40 of financing. That's the impact of this catalytic capital. So this is second segment where we are trying to make the difference in the green self-built construction home. And the third is, you can call as the clean energy. Let me give you the example of clean energy where we invested a large equity, $125 million in a company called Fourth Partners, where we were the anchor investors, and mobilize another 150 from ADB and DEG. That money will essentially help Fourth Partner to to arrive on a portfolio of 3.7 gigawatt. And this Fourth Partner is catering to the C&I, essentially for the industrial decarbonization. So I think these are three, examples, specific examples where IFC, we have taken the lead. And of course, if I go into my previous examples, Tata Clean Tech, which we formulated, is I think is a great, impactful investment from IFC side, where IFC invested 20% alongside that Tata Capital to form this first Clean Tech NBFC, which is now Tata Capital. So these are some examples, and you said what next, right? That was your second question. So we are seeing, some green shoots in other areas, for example, energy storage, sustainable cities, e-mobility, and there are some barriers, but this is where we are trying to make inroads. So I'll give you one example of sustainable cities. So India needs roughly $55 billion per year as we are urbanizing very fast. But generally there is a reluctance from the urban local bodies, for a commercial borrowing. So there is hardly less than 3% commercial borrowing from the urban local bodies. So generally they rely on the fiscal transfer from the federal and the state, that accounts for 76% of the borrowing. Then 11% internal accrual, 10% World Bank ADB through sovereign guarantees. But commercial borrowing, from the cities, from the urban local bodies is very, very less. Here IFC is trying to partner with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to sensitize and we are doing a lot of capacity building so that this commercial borrowing goes up. So there are so many areas where we are trying to do, but let me stop here. Thanks.
Fabulous. All these are examples of additionality, which is the roles which MDBs are supposed to play. Hard to abate sector, that is one sector where a lot of work needs to be done. Again, green buildings, a lot of work needs to be done. And IFC is taking a very proactive role. Again, sustainable cities. I think some of these initiatives will eventually lead to a multiplier. And of course, your initiative on clean energy is already showing results, whether it is investment in Tata Clean Tech Capital or in initiatives like Fourth Partners. Now coming to Hafiz. Hafiz, you are into a global role and you have a good experience of markets outside India, including Singapore. So are there some learnings from Singapore which can be replicated to India so that we can solve some of our big challenges which Debirat spoke about?
Thanks Manish, and pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel. So as you mentioned, I'm part of a global sustainable finance team at DBS, so helping to structure and execute sustainable finance transactions across different markets, across different industries. And I think one value of that is that I can take together some of the best practices across different markets and different industries and how it can be applied to a particular transaction or to a particular corporate client here in India. I think India and Singapore, while there are obviously very large differences in terms of how the market is, one key similarity is that both markets are really major financial centers. So they have an integral role to actually be a conduit to channel the flow of capital to the right sources, right? And I think the regulators here and as well as the regulators in Singapore have taken necessary steps to ensure that capital is flowing in the right direction for climate transition. So maybe if I could share some of some of the key learnings from Singapore's experience that could be of relevance here in India. I think there are 4 key items. The first, and it's definitely something that was discussed about yesterday as well, is the disclosure requirements. So Singapore has adopted mandatory disclosure requirements for listed entities for the past 3 years now. In India, it's still relatively new with the BRSR requirements coming in, which is the right first step. But I think beyond disclosure requirements, while it is key because without disclosure, you can't actually move in the right direction in terms of taking the right steps to decarbonize your operations, I think it's also important to strike a balance between compliance with these disclosure requirements as well as enabling climate action to basically take the necessary steps to move in the right direction. So I think as we discussed earlier during the break, I think sometimes corporates can be too burdened with compliance and disclosure requirements that they have less resources to actually spend on actually decarbonizing or putting in place the right strategies for the future in terms of meeting their climate goals and targets. Right? So I think if these disclosure requirements can go beyond just mandatory compliance to actually looking forward to target setting and setting a roadmap to decarbonization, I think that will really help to scale corporate action, and which in turn will help boost demand for climate finance and sustainable finance. So the second point, which is also something that Dibirav has mentioned earlier, is taxonomy. Right? So in Singapore, as Dibirav mentioned, we already have what we call a Singapore-Asia taxonomy, which was released at the end of last year. I think one unique thing about this taxonomy is that it was not something that was designed by the government or the regulators. It was actually an industry-led initiative. So what happened in Singapore is that the regulator put together a group of financial institutions, corporates, institutional investors to come together to design that taxonomy, to define what exactly are activities that would be considered green, transition, and what would be out of scope of such financing activities as well. So I think that is something key for India to consider as well. I know that there are already efforts to develop a taxonomy here, but I think defining it to be in line with the industry's current practices and also have it interoperable with some of the other taxonomies that are available in the markets would be key to actually channel capital in the right direction and for the right projects. So the third point would be really collaboration, and this was something that was mentioned quite a lot in yesterday's panels as well. And I think in Singapore, there has been an ecosystem that has been set up to enable that collaboration. So within the financial institution space, there are various associations and working groups that have been developed to jointly work on some of these solutions. And this could be things like I said, taxonomy alignment. It could be things like developing blended finance mechanisms, so pooling together institutional capital and commercial capital to channel to the right projects, and also develop things like carbon markets and nature-based solutions. Because I think this is not something that commercial banks can achieve alone. It would require a concerted effort across multiple stakeholders as an ecosystem of collaboration. And last but not least would be the regulatory support as well. So in Singapore, specifically on sustainable finance, there have been a grant scheme that the Monetary Authority of Singapore have put in place for corporate issuers and borrowers who are looking to tap on sustainable finance to offset some of the expenses that they incur, to engage with a third-party consultant to ensure that these transactions align with industry best practice. So I think these are some of the key learnings. I think there's a lot more that can be said about other markets as well. But I think one thing I would like to also emphasize is that in India, there is quite a lot of opportunity for climate finance. So not just in the energy transition space, but I think as what Rajesh mentioned, industrial decarbonization. So it's not just about companies in the hard-to-abate sectors, but across the board because of India's role as an export market, as a major manufacturing hub. And what we can say is that India is probably the scope 3 emissions of the world. So I think India plays a very key role to actually unlock some of these opportunities going forward.
Thanks for that, Hafiz. All very important points. Taxonomy has been repeatedly highlighted. And thankfully, already in the last budget, Honorable Finance Minister had announced that country will come out with a taxonomy very soon. So as has been mentioned here, it will be a very important step to avoid the greenwashing. Doing something in the name of green, which actually is not green. A very pertinent point. Then disclosure, again, very, very important. And you rightly said that it's not just about disclosure. It is about disclosure without too much of bureaucracy. And also the next step is to set up targets. Disclosure in isolation will not mean too much. Plus, there are other things which can be done, like financial incentives. And collaboration, of course, is very important because this entire ecosystem is new to everyone. So whether it is financiers or it is developers or it is manufacturers, I think all of us need to collaborate to ensure that financing really happens and we understand each other better. I would now go to, in more detail, on the financial instruments. In this space, we have heard about a lot of financial instruments, starting from green bond, blue bond, sustainability-linked bond, where IFC has played a pioneering role in India. So I would like to understand from practitioners, starting with Debirat. Debirat, have HSBC used these kind of instruments like green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds in India? And what has been your experience? And what do we need to do to ensure that these instruments get more popular?
Manish, as India's largest foreign bank, obviously we have been at the top end of arranging capital for our customers. And in the space of sustainable financing, the emergence of newer instruments have been obviously happening. Now, to take a step back, I think the highest point that as a country we had reached in terms of issuance of these bonds were way back in 2021. Where I think the overall gross issuances crossed $21 billion. And since then, there have been too many issues which have happened, COVID being one of them. the interest rate cycle moving up being another one, which obviously impacted the overall issuances of these bonds. And currently, the issuances are in the ballpark of about $15 billion. But what needs to be viewed is, not the absolute value, but the relative percentages of these instruments in relation to the overall capital raised. And that, I think, is very small. So, and what is leading to that? So primarily, I think there has to be a mindset shift at the boardroom level, because more often than not, and I will request my fellow panelists' views on this, more often than not, a discussion with the borrower about a sustainable finance instrument, irrespective of its nature, is about what is the pricing advantage I will get. And more often than not, that is not the case. There is a pricing advantage, but not to the extent that that itself should lead you to that. The reason you go out and issue a sustainable finance instrument, be it a bond, SLL, or a loan, is because at a board level, you have taken a decision to walk a certain path, and as Rajesh mentioned, you have certain KPIs in mind, or you are trying to build specific assets which are green. And that's the reason that you are going that path and you are raising dedicated capital. So that understanding has to be very clear, because once you issue that, there are certain obligations that you take upon yourselves in terms of monitoring and reporting those. Again, coming back to the greenwashing risk. So I personally think that we are absolutely minuscule right now in terms of the overall potential of this market versus what has been issued. And there is lots to happen. I think from the government side, obviously the government has also taken the first step way back in January 2023 when it announced its first sovereign green bond. It was about 8,000 crores, and there were a few tranches after that. But what I understand also is that the secondary market liquidity in those bonds are yet to develop. So there is some amount of education that will happen. We are also going to probably witness a reversal of the interest rate cycle globally that should make raising bonds more lucrative than what it has been in the last couple of years. And with this overall sustainability theme catching momentum, we definitely expect more and more corporates to tap into this, given better rate environment, given better understanding, and a better dedication towards the cause of sustainability to issue that. But yes, it's the tip of the iceberg right now. We are still not happy with the pace at which it has gone.
Yeah, so clearly, much more will happen than what we have seen in the past. One is that the financing requirement itself will go up. And secondly, the interest rate cycle is also likely to reverse. As far as the cost is concerned, right now clearly it's one additional channel to raise finance. That's the way one needs to look at it. And one also needs to look at it as an responsibility to do something which is green. Now, when it comes to the financial instruments, one is the instruments like green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, which have certain obligation from the issuer. At the same time, there are other important aspects of financing, which partly Rajesh spoke about, which is the blended finance, which is quite important to ensure that overall certain segment becomes viable because of the donor funding. At the same time, we have seen that quite a few times, in fact, most of the times, the buyer of renewable energy or service from the clean tech initiative are public institutions. And sometimes health of those public institutions are not very great, which leads to issues in the enforcement of contracts. So there is the need to see that some kind of a multilateral development institutions comes in and they do something to reduce the risk in the transaction. It could be via way of partial guarantees or first loss guarantees or something on those lines. So I would like to understand from Rajesh that is this something which is being discussed within the community of multilateral development banks? And is there something which is where more action is likely to happen? Instruments where there is a partial risk guarantee or first loss guarantees, those kind of instruments.
Okay, so whether it's being discussed.
Yeah.
I think, Manish, private capital mobilization is the number one thing for the MDBs, right? And we are going to discuss in COPE also on this new collective quantified goals on on climate finance, right? So if you look into the ask from the global south, which including India, I think they're asking for $1 trillion kind of investment from the developed world, while the actual thing which is happening is $100 billion per year. And on that too, there are some concerns from the global south that it is not grant instrument and so on. So MDBs are pretty aware of that this agenda, is going to be the most important thing at the time of COP, and the private capital mobilization is going to be critical to achieve this $1 trillion or whatever numbers we have per year. I think our capital is scarce, right? We are a commercial entity, IFC. IBRD is using its own sources of money. So these type of structures are very important. And as I gave you example, $1 of UK Magic is able to mobilize $20 to $30 of financing from others. So the power of catalytic capital, I think in India we have not seen. In fact, Manish, we came out with a report, IFC and IEA, and we estimated India needs around probably, and that was a South Asia number, so I would say mainly India, 90% is India. For energy transition itself, South Asia, mainly India, would need $16 billion per year concession finance. While if you see the amount of concession finance we are using in India is just less than $500 million. So which means we need to up our game by 32 times. While we don't have the blended finance framework here, right? We don't have the red carpet for deploying these instruments. That said, I think RBI, the central bank, is pretty much aware of, and these kind of instruments. So for example, IFC in India, we are not able to do risk sharing facility right now. There is no automatic approval for us being a non-resident lender. But RBI is aware of that these instruments have really a big role to play, and hopefully we'll be having good news to use this type of products. And last year IFC disseminated one report on blended finance on various instruments, and but I think in summary, there is less awareness, on our part to understand the power of this catalytic capital, right? We generally think it's a concession loan, right? When we talk of the blended finance, while the risk sharing facility, the junior equity instruments are hardly being deployed, right? There are one or two cases in India where, Macquarie, for example, for the leasing platform, they're using this GCF money in the form of junior equity. And then one private equity firm is also using this junior equity from GCF to do investment in the climate tech startups. So these type of instruments, we have hardly used. Regulatory obstacles, the lack of awareness among all the stakeholders, but I'm pretty optimistic that with this kind of awareness, we will also get an opportunity to roll out these type of products. So to answer Manish, yes, I think the guarantee thing is very much on the card. In fact, we have asked MIGA. So MIGA is also part of the World Bank Group now to take up the responsibility on guarantee, right? Earlier, IBRD used to, roll out guarantee, IFC, but now there is a dedicated department and, a huge focus from the MIGA side on the guarantees platform. And so we'll see a lot of action, using this product.
Yeah, that's definitely a very good news. As the clean tech sector develops, and as we develop, sectors like green hydrogen, hard to abate sectors, energy efficiency sectors, battery sustainable agriculture, then I think there will be a need for catalytic finance, including guarantees. And I'm sure we will hear a lot going forward on this. Now, what is happening is that apart from the initiatives at the macro level, we have seen a lot of institutional and bank level initiative, financial institution level initiatives to see how more and more funding can go into this. And some of them have been quite innovative. So Hafiz, we would like to understand from you, what has DBS done in this direction?
Yeah, so I think as a bank, I think as the panelists have mentioned, there are a lot of constraints and a lot of challenges that we face to channel capital in the right direction. So at DBS, we're trying to explore how else we can support beyond the traditional financing instruments like loans and bonds. So what we have realized is that there is also a big need to support the value chains of some of our corporate clients because, again, as mentioned, to decarbonize the economy, there's a need for the entire economy to move, not just the large corporates, but also their respective value chain companies. So we see there's a role for us to play in terms of providing working capital financing support, as well as supply chain financing support. And we're trying to integrate sustainability considerations into these instruments as well. This will actually require a partnership with the large anchor buyers, and these could be Western MNCs, or this could be companies outside of India that are actually importing products from India as well. And we've had a success case in that where DBS had partnered with H&M Group. So H&M Group, a large multinational apparel retailer, actually has its supply chains here in India. So what we have developed with H&M Group was that we are part of a small ecosystem of a bank, H&M as the anchor buyer, as well as specialist consultants that actually went down on the ground to SME suppliers of H&M here in India to conduct energy audits and to identify what are the right projects that these SME suppliers need to actually undertake in order for H&M Group to achieve their Scope 3 emissions reduction targets. So this is key because the projects were identified and structured in accordance to international best practices, which takes away the risk of greenwashing. And then these projects, once identified, were then referred to DBS, and then DBS, together with the support from our large Western MNC customer, we are able to provide lower cost financing to this SME supplier for that particular project, which was used for energy efficiency upgrades as well as renewable energy generation activities as well. Right? So this is, I guess, a proof of concept that, with collaboration and developing an ecosystem, we could potentially channel capital to those that need it the most. Right? And since then, DBS, we have also partnered with other apparel companies as part of a global initiative called the Future Supplier Initiative, where there are various consultants as well as institutional investors that are there as well to mobilize capital in the form of, I would say, a form of blended finance to actually support the supply chains of textile and apparel companies, both in South Asia and markets like Vietnam as well. Right? So this was one key initiative that we are working on in this space. I think the second example I can provide is in terms of our collaboration within India as well, in this case was for the compressed biogas or CBG supply chains in India. So we actually worked with Reliance Industries, who are working on various CBG plants here in India. So the challenge here is that the feedstock to these CBG plants is essentially agri-waste, which is from either agri-farmers or agri-aggregators, or agri-waste aggregators. And the challenge for them is to get access to working capital financing to tackle the various agricultural flows as well as the seasonality of these crop cycles. So what we've provided is that we provided working capital support to some of these agri-waste aggregators with the support of Reliance Industries as the off-taker of those CBG projects, right? So this enabled us to channel capital in the right direction. So some of these SMEs can also get access to critical working capital financing that they need in order to support these larger projects and to support the goals of the larger corporates here in India as well. So I think more can be done in India, definitely. I think blended finance, like what Rajesh mentioned, is still relatively new. So it'll be interesting to see how this space develops over time as more and more Indian corporates start to look at various projects and start to engage their supply chains in their decarbonization journeys.
This is very interesting and a great way to reduce the Scope 3 emissions of the companies. Actually, this is something which can be replicated even by the other institutions. And honestly, the market is so big that there is no question of competition against each other. And as you rightly said, that blended finance is something which can be used for these kind of instruments. and it can really make a huge difference. So now going ahead, normally when we talk about climate financing, the focus is more on the climate mitigation projects, meaning renewable energy, electric mobility. But equally important is adapting to climate change. And for that also a huge amount of financing would be required. Normally the thinking is that adaptation financing is a public good, and it's something which will have to be done by the government. Maybe disaster management or something like that. But in reality, that's not completely true. It's only partially true. Because when it comes to adaptation, now there are technologies which can make projects commercially viable. Segment like accessibility to water, rainwater harvesting. India is losing so much of groundwater. So that can be a very important project and a viable project. Secondly, say, post-harvest loss reduction through a cold chain infrastructure. That can be a viable project. Accessibility to cooling. Cooling today we think is a luxury, but actually it will become necessity going forward. And a lot of startups are doing great job. But then when it comes to financing, I don't think a lot of financing is available for these segments. So I would like to understand from Rajesh, are there any plans of IFC? Is there some serious work happening to see how adaptation financing can scale up?
I think this is a good topic. So Manish, look, climate adaptation / resilience is equally important for us as that of mitigation. Now, MDBs, the Multilateral Development Bank, including IFC, we have this framework called Paris Alignment. And Paris Alignment means that 100% of our transactions, what we do, they have to be aligned with mitigation and adaptation goals of this Paris Agreement. Now, so what happened after this adherence to this Paris alignment, we have invested a lot of time, resources, and developed climate analytical tools. So we have an in-house tool called GeoViewer, and which we use to assess the physical risk for each investment. Despite of the compliance on this Paris alignment, we have seen the adaptation finance overall in IFC is less than 5%. Right? 95% is mitigation. And, I was trying to see why it is so. Now, the thing is, as you rightly said, we generally don't come across, on a private sector side, 100% pure play type of projects. As you said, unlike public sector where early warning system or sea level or ecosystem restoration and so on. So IBRD, is doing 50% adaptation, 50% mitigation, while IFC, which is part of the World Bank group, our numbers look not that great. So this is one reason, not coming across 100% pure play adaptation type of projects. Second, our investments on adaptation finance, I think, is undervalued, and I'll tell you why. We take only the incremental of the total capex, which is actually negating the climate risk. So, for example, solar generation project. Right? So, if developer is say raising the plinth level, right? That construction which is negating the flood risk is the adaptation finance for IFC. That's our definition, right? So which will be 1% of the total capex, right? So likewise on the green building side, when I said we have made a significant amount of investment, the insulation part, right? The concrete blocks, hollow concrete blocks, or the roof tiles and so on. That's again insignificant. Now, what we are doing, we are actually trialing a new metric on climate adaptation. For example, it could be a percentage of projects with the adaptation components, right? When we'll say 80% of IFC's project had this adaptation component, I think this will look a good story to tell, right? And or for example, dollar value of assets made resilient. That will look another very important thing, right? We do $60 billion financing in IFC globally, would say, 50% of our assets were resilient. So this will look more attractive, right? Quite catchy. So I think these are some reasons, but that said, we are also in the process of coming up with a programmatic large $1 billion facility. For example, there is one for which We just got a no objection letter from Ministry of Environment, wherein we are seeking some $250 million odd money from GCF. IFC will put in $400 million, and it's a $1.2 billion large water resilient infrastructure facility, multi-country, and India is part of it. So we got the no objection letter. So let's see when this facility is going to be operational. So underlying projects will be, your desal projects or a water supply or the non-revenue water type of, or sewage treatment and then recycling, that sort of treatment projects are going to be there. Now, when we talk to our private sector clients, right, Manish, good thing is that most of them, I think they're pretty familiar with the nuance of climate risk, which was not the case. And they are in touch with the climate analytic firms. In fact, as I said, we have a Geo Navigator tool. There are 15 tools in the market, and they are in touch with the top such climate analytic firms. And they tell us that they have done all the assessment for their existing assets. Probably the investors they're pushing them, right? That give us a stamp of approval that you have done this assessment and so on. So I can see clearly in the last 2 years a lot of awareness among our private sector clients on adaptation. On the public sector side, I think, though it is not my domain, but I can tell you when we look into subnational, where we are allowed to do commercial financing, when we analyze the DPRs, the detailed project reports, I think this is where, where we don't find any reference of climate risk. So the definition of climate adaptation is that you need to identify the risk. That's one, climate vulnerability risk assessment, which we don't find in the DPRs. Then identification of the measures, which again we don't find, because most of the DPRs on the government side are on L1 basis, where I was talking to Tata Consulting that why you guys don't do adaptation type of thing. He said, look, Rajesh, in DPRs, it's not asked for, right? And even for the PPP projects which we structure, right, in India, there is no ask to structure the transaction so that these elements are incorporated in the planning stage itself, right? So, but again, that said, there is a lot of awareness coming up. CDRI is there. I'm sure they must be doing a lot of things. And yesterday, I understand CII came out with the report on the climate risk framework. So hopefully in 2 to 3 years, we'll see more and more projects coming up, more and more awareness coming up, and we also playing our role on adaptation and focus on resilience. Thanks.
Very, very important insight. I think a lot of work needs to happen here. Once we start giving importance to adaptation, then I think it will happen in the projects. A very, very important insight for everyone. So we still have some time left, and I would like to invite questions from the audience. Yeah, please go ahead, sir. Sir, first you and then you. Yeah. So my question is, can someone give a mic to him? Although you are audible, you can go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Pranay Kumar, and my company name is Vasudha. I'm also managing trustee of Solid Waste Management Foundation. My question is that I heard a lot of chemistry, botany included in finance, but I did not hear the term MSME, which forms the 96% of our industrial units. All I heard was a lot of fear regarding greenwashing, and we, on both sides, it is not clear what is greenwashing, what is sustainable, what is circular economy. We are all learning together. So I heard that like most of the banks and the financial institutions, people are risk averse. But climate change and its Mother Nature's is going at a very rapid pace. If we try to study the DPR and long range and short range, and we have heard all about from Kerala to forest fires and all that, it is growing at a rapid pace. And industry has a lot of innovation, and it can be converted to the larger society also. So my question is simple. How can your parameters be realigned to serve the country and the world rather than just saving the financial institutions?
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent point. we are talking about a problem which is more urgent than we think it is. And everyone has to play a role. So, it starts from the regulations. And after regulations, it comes to the implementation. Financial institutions have an important role because if the financing is cut, then a lot of these projects will not happen. And your point on MSME is absolutely right. I think we are definitely late in this. But I would like to invite views of the panelists. Rajesh, would you like to go for it? Or Divrat?
Okay, so we were addressing quite a number of issues, but to take specific context on MSMEs, I think Hafiz very clearly alluded to the fact on supply chain financing. And while Hafiz just touched upon it, we can actually spend an hour talking about it. I think any large financial institution worth its salt today has a very credible, sustainable supply chain program. I mean, his bank has it, we have it, and these are large programs with sizable assets. We have also been talking about sustainability linked loans. And the idea of sustainability linked loans as opposed to a green loan is that when a large corporate signs up for a sustainability linked loan and KPIs, it has to walk a path which will entail its supply chain to also follow that. And as a result, they are able to achieve concessional finance which percolates down. That's the idea. How efficiently the percolation happens is a matter of debate. It's definitely not efficient. But I think across the board, financial institutions agree that if MSME is the base of the pyramid and a very substantial base of the pyramid, no significant achievement can happen in the field of sustainability without actually impacting the MSMEs. And each of the banks have already certain programs running. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to whichever bank that you are dealing with and ask what kind of a program they have. And I also know SIDBI also runs some of them. It's definitely not what it should be, but a start has been made. There is some amount of capital that has flowed through, which is important. My response to your question that why are banks and financial institutions risk averse? Well, it's your money. So if you want your money to be safeguarded in the banks and financial institutions, it is our duty to do the diligence in the way that we need to do, while being cognizant that we need to walk the extra mile to, and I'll give you a very live example as to how we are innovating, and this is very specific to my bank. I'm sure every bank has such example. So one of the key challenges in financing an electric vehicle, for example, has been that it is very difficult to determine a residual value because that secondary market has not yet evolved. And for vehicle financing in the commercial space or the traditional space, there is a residual value based on which you do a LTV. And that was impacting, a decisioning in terms of how much financing is available. As far as we are concerned as HSBC, we took a call that, we anyway have an unsecured retail loan for retail clients. We thought, why the same product cannot be repurposed to actually extend it for electric vehicle financing? And we already have a program up and running for our corporate clients, for their employees. We are going and financing 100% of EVs without hypothecation. And I think that's a big call that we have taken. So all of us are trying to repurpose our existing products, are trying to think about new products to serve the needs of the MSME and also at the retail end. But we are all learning.
Hafiz, you want to add something?
And I think, just to echo Dibira's thoughts as well, I think some of these solutions for MSMEs are already being offered by banks, but I think the gap is really in terms of education, right? To let the SMEs know that there is avenues for them to raise financing. And I think you touched a bit on greenwashing as well, like what is greenwashing. I think the taxonomy that is going to be developed in India is going to be a big game changer because that will define what exactly are the eligible projects to tap on green financing. But in the meantime, I think what SMEs can do is that if you're already operating in a space where you have certain projects or certain sustainability initiatives that you need to be financed, just take a look at some of the international taxonomies available. Look it up, or most of these taxonomies are public. Just see whether some of these projects that you're undertaking falls within those eligible categories. Have a conversation with your banks, and I'm sure they can find a way, either through supplier financing or other means, to support those projects as well. Yeah.
Thank you. The time is up, but we can have one more question. Please go ahead, yeah.
Thank you for giving me a chance. My name is Nitish, and I'm representing Advantive Solution here. So my question here is, since in case of green lending also, it has been observed that financial institution is more focused on the financial return rather than the green ecosystem return. I want to understand this, your thought on this. Like whether as a financial institution, whether you are focusing only on financial return or you are seeing a green ecosystem as a return.
Yeah, you want to go for it, Hafiz?
Yeah, so I'll just say from international banks' perspective. So as a bank, we're regulated by various regulators all over the world, including with MAS, where we are headquartered in Singapore. So the expectations for these regulators is for banks to channel more capital to green projects. So that's definitely what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, these regulators also emphasize on the financial market stability. So that is also a key aspect. So the minimum return hurdles are there to protect depositors like yourselves, to protect the financial markets, to ensure that stability is there. So that will always be the primary responsibility for financial institutions. But there's also a second element to it, which is climate risk. So as banks, we also have in place our climate risk stress testing, our climate risk due diligence across our entire portfolio. So it's evident for banks that have a current portfolio that is, for example, heavy on coal, that they need to start to move that portfolio towards green assets. So that is why we are trying to offer all these green financing solutions to mitigate the climate risks of our respective portfolios as well. So to answer your question, climate, in terms of climate impact or ecosystem green impact, yes, that's definitely being emphasized, but it has to be with the respective minimum returns that we need to actually operate within the regulatory parameters.
Would like to add something, Devrat?
I think the fundamental will always be allocation of capital basis returns. I mean, that's the fundamental with which everybody operates. So you cannot really move away from that. Now, the very fact that all of us are on this stage discussing this is the very basis that as financial institutions, over the number of years now, last few years at least, we have increasingly diverted a significant portion of our own balance sheet towards green financing. While the numbers may differ bank to bank, some banks may have been early, some banks may have been late, and especially with the draft discussion paper that RBI came out in August last year around sustainable finance and what all it expects banks to do, we will see increasing amount of participation of the wider banking system in this space. But as I said, it's a heterogeneous mix, the pace is different, but any meaningful large bank today has already a dedicated amount of capital which has gone towards sustainable financing. Now to expect that the capital will not earn anything does not really meet the regulatory criteria also. So it has to earn whatever is the minimum thresholds as defined by the respective banks. But the very focus on dedicating more and more amount of capital is definitely happening across the banking space as well as the overall financial space.
Yeah. See, ultimately the financial institution is trading money. They are borrowing money and they are lending money. And they are responsible to a number of stakeholders, their own shareholders, to the regulators, to the depositors. So probably they can lend at a lower cost if they can borrow at a lower cost. But to expect them to sacrifice some other stakeholder and look at one stakeholder probably may not be right in terms of the fiduciary responsibility. But having said that, I think because of the huge ecosystem we are creating, eventually things will change, the projects which need money will get money. Important thing is to remember that out of the whole, trillions of dollars we are talking about, at least 2/3 or maybe more than that is in the money. Those are viable projects. And what is important is that those projects should be well structured. If they are well structured, then capital will come by itself. It doesn't need any subsidy. What we need is more supply of those projects. And then there is balance 30%, say a project in battery or green hydrogen, or say hard to abate sectors, which are still developing. And that is where the entire ecosystem needs to come together. It is not, someone subsidizing those projects. It is the ecosystem system coming together, whether it is developers or it is government or it is manufacturers, and together deciding how these projects can be made more viable. And they, of course, need subsidies through various means, up to a point. Like your solar needed a subsidy up to a point, then it became viable. Even electric buses, they needed subsidy up to a point, now they're becoming viable. So essentially, we are talking about collaboration here. How various actors can collaborate and make the sectors viable. So we had a great discussion. And if there are more questions, then we can discuss it offline. So thank you very much, audience. Thank you very much, the panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my, with this we end the session. Our sincere gratitude goes out to our distinguished panel members and moderator for making this an extremely insightful discussion. I kindly request all our speakers to gather for a group photograph. As we conclude this session, we encourage you to stay engaged for our next discussion on mainstreaming MSMEs for a sustainable future. The session will be held in Sovereign 1. I request all delegates to kindly move to Sovereign 1 to attend the next session. Additionally, we have an exciting exhibition featuring innovative sustainability solutions from our startups. We invite you to explore the stalls during the breaks and discover the transformative ideas shaping a sustainable tomorrow. Thank you so much.